The concept of this tool is extremely fascinating. I have to say that the headline is gripping. The Muslim and the Jew. It's something that you wouldn't expect in today's day and age, and you certainly wouldn't expect the names. Dr. Azzam Tamimi, Rabbi Weiss. You wouldn't expect those two to be together. An Orthodox Jew, someone accused of being an Islamist, touring the country, talking about issues that are of great concern to both communities, in fact, to a wider audience.
You see, the amazing thing about this is that right from the beginning, it dispels the misconception about the conflict that this is between Muslims and Jews. It's not. It was never about conflict of religions or conflict even of cultures. This is about something political that started in Europe, and then this is what we try to convey to the audiences we have.
Does that idea come across in the meetings that you're having? Does that come across that indeed this issue of a Palestinian Muslim and an Orthodox Jew coming together, talking about things that they share? Does this come across that it's not then about religion?
Yeah, well, with the help of the Almighty, it's just opportune. I think that this tour is taking place just at the time that the Zionists celebrate their creation, and we feel that this is the essence part of the Nakba. The Nakba is a tragedy, this colossal tragedy, and as Dr. Tamimi was saying, I always show pictures how we used to always live together in peace and harmony. We have a distinctly different religion, as is obvious, but we believe in one God. We coexisted in not only as friends from the distance. We coexisted in the same courtyards, babysitting each other's children and living in peace. The difference of religion, the distinct difference of religion, was never an impediment for peaceful coexistence. On the contrary, we helped each other where we compensated. We had to go to synagogue, all the people on the Yom Kippur, even the women and so forth. So the Muslims didn't go then, so we were able to, they entrusted their children with the Muslim neighbors, and the most precious thing that a person has. And it was reciprocated. That is the way the coexistence was constantly of friendship, of trust, of helping. So the issue of the difference of religion, as Dr. Tamimi was saying, has absolutely nothing to do with the problem that exists today, that's this quagmire that so many people are breaking their heads trying to understand. How do we get out of this problem? The problem is a new problem that was just developed a mere 100-odd years ago from a group of a politically flawed concept, Zionism, which is a transformation from religion to nationalism. They came along, all of a sudden they came in as new neighbors into the Holy Land, and they preach and they traipse around the land in the facade as if they're representing Judaism, and they claim that every problem that exists now is because there's a rift and that people hate the Jews. There's a difference of religion.
Is that partly why you put this idea together? I mean, what was the motive?
Well, I'm not the first person. I mean, a friend of mine in Liverpool had organised a Muslim and Jew event with Miko Peled and Issa Amro 5 years ago. And Issa couldn't get out of Palestine. I don't know if you know if Issa Amro is an amazing activist. And in the end, it was just Miko. And I think Rabbi Beck came, but we didn't have a Muslim. And the idea, obviously, I mean, I was reared a Catholic. I know a lot about religion, and I'd spent a lot of time in Islamic countries. And I had a great interest in Islam. And it was, my experience was built around the Labour Party, you know, my passion for free speech and my campaigning for Palestine. And I think for me, the whole story began with this new definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, which forbids you to criticize Israel. So I had a big campaign against it, a big petition. Israel is a racist endeavor, quite provocative. And of course, my trade union wanted to expel me. And that's when I first came across the Neturei Karta.
When was this? Around what time?
2018.
Okay.
So the Liverpool
So fairly recently.
friend, Liverpool friend was a friend of Aaron Cohen, who's the spokesman in the UK for the Neturei Karta. And Aaron agreed to come to my hearings with the GMB, trade union. I work at the National Health Service. I'm shop steward. It's a hearing about expulsion for saying Israel's racist. And Aaron Cohen came to Glasgow, came to London, said, there's nothing wrong with criticizing Israel. I'm a rabbi. This is your freedom of speech. The GMB just ignored him. So I was expelled. And eventually I had to leave the Labour Party. They were going to expel me. I went through the whole charade of disciplinaries.
They expelled many Jews as well.
Oh, they're expelling everyone at the moment. I mean, they've gone on 600,000 members to 200,000 and masses of expulsions. Not just me, anyone now. They're coming for anyone. But what happened was I live in Edinburgh and Balfour Declaration from Edinburgh. And we created Israel. Britain created Israel.
Yeah.
This is a British creation, absolutely. And I felt I had a duty to help. So I went to Edinburgh Council and said, look at the trouble we've caused. Why don't we twin with Gaza, of all places? Because Gaza is the most isolated and needs the help. And everybody knows about Gaza. No one else talked about twinning with Gaza. I'm the only person in Britain who pushed for twinning with Gaza. And we spent 3 years campaigning. And last August, we finally agreed the council would help in some way. Not twinning, because they say they don't twin anymore. But on the back of all this, I went to New York. There was a big conference a year ago, Al-Auda, and the Palestinians in America are very organized, very passionate. They're not frightened of losing citizenship. They get out there. You go to a conference, it's not quite middle-class British liberals like me. They're Palestinians, and lingua franca is Arabic. You have to speak some Arabic.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd already known that the Neturei Karta were based in New York, and I'd written, and I really very much wanted to meet some representatives. And as soon as I got into the conference, there was Rabbi Weiss sitting right at the front. And I was like, this was a Saturday, so he had his Sabbath hat on. Amazing, impressive, and did his spiel to the audience. And I was knocked out. I was like, we've never seen anyone like this. Aaron is old, he's 80, but I've never met a rabbi who spoke like this. And I went to him and I said, Rabbi, will you come to Britain? And he said, I want to come to Britain, but I want to speak to Muslims. And I thought, right, okay, that's my job. So I'll tell you how I got the money later, but I managed to lure him here, and I spent a year reaching out to
if I may.
And I knew Azzam separately through the Labour conference.
We've had now a relationship for now going on 20 years.
With God's help.
More than 20 years even, when our Jewish brothers from Stamford Hill and from across northern London would actually come walking across London on a Saturday in order to join our demonstrations for Palestine, to join our demonstration against the war in Iraq and the such.
3 hours a walk.
3 hours of walking on a Sabbath, on a Saturday. And that's when we got to know Rabbi Weiss and his brothers. And the kind of talk that took you by surprise in New York, we've been listening to, we've been conversing, we've been trying to project now for years. But let me be a little bit honest here. You sitting next to a rabbi in full Orthodox garb. I mean, how does that look? You're from Hebron. How does that look to your brothers, your family? What do they think when they see that kind of image?
Well, frankly, Anas, myself, my family, most of the people, not just in Palestine, but in the Arab world and probably around the Muslim world, knew very little about the existence of people like Rabbi Weiss. We thought all Jews were the same. We thought the invasion and occupation of Palestine was a Jewish endeavor.
Because that's what you see.
Yes, and I actually, may Allah bless the soul of Dr. Abdul Wahab al-Misiri, rahimahullah. He was the first really to open my eyes to the reality of this conflict. And then I met Rabbi Weiss. I met him when Ahmad Mansour wanted to interview him for his program, Bila Hudud in Al Jazeera, and I was asked to translate. And we met at Churchill Hotel. And
Churchill. The empire that took away the Palestinian.
Yeah, well, it retains the name, but the owners are now completely different. But anyway, we met in Churchill Hotel, and I just couldn't believe myself sitting next to a rabbi with full attire, and then he was speaking a language that was a lot more radical than my own when it came to Zionism and to our position. It was an eye-opener. And I know that there are some people who still have the same misconception. Even when Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi met a delegation from Naturi Karta, some people tried to make an issue out of it and say, "Oh, look who is standing next to him," etc. But we had to make sure that these images reach as many people as possible. That we want people to open their eyes and see for themselves that Judaism and the Jews are not the same as Zionism and the Zionists.
And may I add also the advent of the opening of the Palestinian parliament after the elections in 2006, which, whether yourself was there or whether your brothers were there, who attended the opening.
I think that was Rabbi Hirsch, I think.
It's probably Moshe Hirsch.
Who attended. And that image is also sometimes exploited by those who are detractors.
Yes.
But I'd like to ask the flip question.
Right.
The kind of response you get when meeting with Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, alayhi rahmatullah, when meeting with Dr. Azzam al-Tamimi, when conversing with Muslims who are seen as being radical in the such.
Right.
What kind of response do you get? And then, by the way, I'd like to add that I've lost count of how many times your offices in New York have been ransacked or lit on fire or the such.
With the help of the Almighty, I could just say it's always, it hurts always to hear the fact that it is something of a surprise, because Zionism, before it even invaded the Holy Land, this was a political movement of people who are estranged from Judaism. Again, I keep on referring to pictures, but it's really, anybody can Google when they made the Declaration of Independence in Ben Gurion, made the declaration in 1948. You can see who was sitting there. All non-religious Jews. Nobody's covering their heads. They didn't put God's name in the Declaration of Independence. They changed the language to modern Hebrew, they call it. Their whole issue was a transformation from subservience to God, from obeying the Torah that says that you're not allowed to steal, you're not allowed to kill, and that we're not even allowed to have a Jewish state since the destruction of the temple. So the whole issue of the state of Israel was a total transformation to nationalism and ersatz Judaism, and they attempted in so many ways to uproot the religion from this Judaism. They do everything that's against the Torah, whether it is the desecration of the Sabbath, everything's open on the Sabbath, whether it is digging of graves to build roads, to anything whatever you name it. And of course, the whole concept is that they don't believe in God. They say that we have to have a gun to protect us, so it's rooted in blasphemies. Where was God to protect and all that? So the whole concept of this Zionism is essentially, it's an antithetical to Judaism. It's totally contradictory.
Yet they claim to be Jewish. That's the problem.
They use
and for us, for us Palestinians, we thought they came because they were Jews.
Right. They put on this, they used the Star of David. They called name Israel. They made a rabbinate and a chief rabbi. But our chief rabbis that were living in Palestine, Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory, met with the king of Transjordan. They met constantly with the leadership. Or you were mentioning Rabbi Moshe Hirsch of blessed memory was part of the Palestinian Authority.
Yes,
and again, all this is documented. And the chief in 1920s, Rabbi Sonnenfeld put articles articles in the Arab papers, pleading with the Arab Congress, pleading with them that that we don't aspire to have any control of anything that is considered holy, that is special to the Arab populace. We even put out little pamphlets about Al-Aqsa Mosque, where we have Rabbi Sonnenfeld's quotes about the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which right now is being attacked again and recently. So this is to our rabbis, not from now, from the beginning when Zionism was in its birth time in Europe. The rabbis ostracized it, not one group, but universally they stood in opposition.
But can I ask you here?
Yeah.
How widespread is that kind of understanding of Judaism?
Right.
How I mean,
so
is it fair to say that your thoughts and your beliefs and your religion, even you're talking religiously now, is sort of a minute minority in the whole scheme of things as we see them today?
It is. It's true. Again, amongst the Jewish people, the religious people, invariably around the world, the very religious communities, or the more the religious, the more anti-Zionist. And again, we put out the rabbis speak out a compilation of leadership.
But yet we see people like yourself who are described as Orthodox Jews inside Palestine doing the most heinous of things.
That is true, but that's why that is what, with God's help, we are here for, to show that the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of the very religious, we have a rabbinate with a chief rabbi, with the communities. Again, here, you go to Stamford Hills, the most religious community, and you try to find an Israeli flag flying there. And you're not going to find people on the street like me going out and announcing, because whoever goes out gets targeted by the Zionists. As you were mentioning in New York, we get targeted, we get harassed, people lose their jobs because they go out and demonstrate. So people are afraid of really being outspoken.
And in France, once they were targeted.
Sure, we were attacked on the streets, and unfortunately the police, the authorities, somehow or other, they don't seem to see when we are being attacked by Zionism. I mean, here, Rabbi Cohen, who was being mentioned in Manchester, his house was shot at. Yeah. They constantly cut his tires. But so you're asking about how we are portrayed. Also, how in the world thinks that the more the Jewish you are, the more you are supporting the state of Israel. So therefore, it's a given that if you're not going to support Israel, you're somehow anti-Semitic. If you're somehow not supporting that, you're doing something bad to the Jews.
As per the definition.
Right. And so it's like they carry on this fear that it shouldn't. People still remember the Holocaust and how the world was silent at the Jewish suffering to a large degree. So the Zionists use this very much, this concept of that the world was silent, and they try to conflate and talk about it as this one, the suffering of the Jews and Judaism, together with the state of Israel, that you have to support it. And again, we keep on driving home. The state of Israel is forbidden. We're not allowed to have a Jewish state since in the structure of the temple. We're not allowed to oppress a people, and especially the Muslim people who for hundreds of years, let's just step back for a moment, just to 100 years ago, 150 years ago, where Jews flourished in every single Muslim country. Yeah. So how dare this movement make a declaration and a narrative that there's a religious conflict and it's an ingrained hate of the Jews from the Muslims to the Jews. This is so hurtful.
But if I may, Rabbi, on the question of minority-majority, yes, it is true that people who are thinking the way Rabbi Weiss is thinking are today a minority among the Jews. But less than 100 years ago, they were the majority.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of Jews around the world, when Zionism was in its infancy, were opposed to Zionism.
They rejected Zionism.
They rejected it. Yeah. They considered it to be blasphemous.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Holocaust happened.
And then we lost our leadership. They were slaughtered, all the leaders, and the Zionists came in control in the Holy Land, and they were able to parcel out the land for the people, and the people were simply without a home and this and that. The Zionists used and manipulated that power that they had to both somehow win the will of many people, and it's really tragic.
Pete, can I ask you, in promoting this tool, which once again I think is revolutionary in terms of amid the wave of pro-Zionist mainstream media coverage and the such, and promoting that kind of narrative, is actually revolutionary. I mean, this whole concept, this title in itself. Now,
Beyond Israel, it's Muslim and Jew tour beyond Israel.
Beyond Israel.
Because that is saying we all believe Israel shouldn't exist, that Israel is an illegal state. Now, this is radical. This is the dangerous ground.
What was the response of those you reached out to, including the mainstream media? I mean, for instance, no one can be more Jewish, with all due respect, than the Rabbi Weiss.
Okay.
No one. I mean, if you set Rabbi Weiss next to Netanyahu and you ask any layman who's the Jew here, they will point to Rabbi Weiss.
I won't sit next to him.
I know.
So I'll tell you, a year ago, when I was conceiving this whole thing, I wrote a paper saying why Zionists are not Jews, which was fueled from the things I'd learned from Aaron Cohen. And I actually sent it to Rabbi Weiss in America. I have no idea what he made of it. But I'd been thinking a lot, for 70 years, people have been fighting on the human rights angle. You've been saying to Israel, you're breaking human rights, you're not treating the Palestinians fairly. And that really hasn't got anywhere. And I thought, well, we need to go further, because their legitimacy is based on their claim to be Jews. And that's where we have to focus. I realized that we needed a new tack. We needed to get right to the core of their claim on the land, which was the claim that they were Jews. Now, I grew up with Zionists, and my best friends. I had a Zionist girlfriend. We're in Bristol University, lots of...
I don't know which is worse, the Zionist or the girlfriend.
Anyway, this was student days. But we didn't know anything. I never knew there was such a thing as Palestine. We never mentioned it. It was just accepted, Israel was Israel, and that was it. There was a land for a people, all that nonsense. And I realized that was at the core of it, their claim to be Jewish. Because I had arguments more recently with this. They said, why are you getting involved in this Palestine thing? This isn't for you. And in Britain, generally, the people who tend to be campaigning are often Jewish intellectuals. They tend to sort of run the Palestine Solidarity campaign, Labour Against the Witch Hunt, Communist Party. They are generally left-wing intellectual Jews. And they didn't... Even my friends, my semi-Zionist friends were angry. Why are you getting involved? There's nothing to do with you. This is between Muslims and Jews. This is not your business. They were angry with me, and some people would call me an upstart. Where are you coming from, Edmund? You don't know anything about it, because people had been campaigning for many years, and they just thought I was a troublemaker, come from nowhere. But I realized that the thing that was missing here was the Muslim view. And there's the Friends of Al-Aqsa in the UK, and it's a bit moribund. It doesn't get out. But things are really changing in Britain. Muslims are becoming far more confident, and we're having lots of Muslims in government. In Scotland, we've got a Muslim First Minister. The leader of the Labour Party is Muslim. There's a demographic change. So for... there's 300,000 Jews in the UK, and maybe half of them support Israel, and they've got a lot of influence. But there's 4 million Muslims. And things, as Muslims become more confident, and they're not carrying the baggage of the Holocaust. They weren't involved in any of that. They're not carrying the baggage of empire. Yeah. They're coming with fresh views, fresh ideas. You get them on the right, you get them on the left. But it's for me, it's a breath of fresh air, because they have a different approach. And this is where I think, for me, the optimism lies. Because once governments begin to change their views, and certain Britain is the mother of Israel, once it begins to change its view, then you begin to have the sort of collapse that we saw in South Africa. Yeah. If ever the money was taken out of Israel, it would fall apart. And, that's when people...
it's quite interesting that we're having this sort of diverse, because... Obviously, Rabbi Weiss, you're approaching it from a religious point of view. You're talking about activism, and the such. But I'd like to ask you, Azzam, regarding how you approach this. Do you find it helpful to speak about Zionism from the ideological, political perspective, as well as the religious that Rabbi Weiss speaks about? What kind of audiences do you think are impacted by that kind of narrative?
Well, I think there is only one right perspective in this regard, and that is the one based on facts, the facts of history. Of course, Palestine, to me as a Palestinian, it matters. It matters to me as a Muslim, as it matters to 2 billion Muslims around the world because of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, because of Al-Quds, because this is really it's a cornerstone to our faith. Yet, the fact of history is that this is just another colonial project like previous colonial projects, no difference. Even the Zionist claim of Judaism is similar to the Crusaders' claim of Christianity.
Yeah.
And probably the generation of Muslims who existed during the time of the Crusades was more enlightened than today's generation of Muslims, because then they recognized the Crusades for what they were. They were the Firinja. They were not the Christians, because the majority of the victims of the Crusades were Christians.
Yeah.
Were Christians living in Anatolia, in what is today the Arab lands or the Middle East. So, like the Crusades were not really was not really a religious conflict. Zionism is also not a religious conflict. Yes, I have a religious motivation as a Muslim to defend Palestine, to stand by the Palestinian people, but I do this not because I'm motivated by a hostility to the Jews or by enmity to them. Far from it, but I'm motivated by hostility to the invaders, to those who are occupying our land, those who dispossessed my parents and thousands of other Palestinian parents. This is my approach, and this is what I seek to convince my audiences.
And the fact that what's happening in Israel is not only afflicting the Palestinian Muslims, but also the Palestinian Christians. I mean, recent clips that we've seen of Israelis passing by Christian nuns and priests and the such, spitting on the ground and the such. It's horrific.
But I would add that it's not only the Christian but the Jewish populace. Again, anybody can look at the pictures how the Jews are treated. The
true Jews. When we say Jews, we're not
the
talking
ones who are
about
practicing the religion. We're not armed. Nobody can accuse us of being the terrorists. What they want to accuse the Palestinians falsely many times. But the Jewish people are never armed. We don't, and yet they're brutally beaten. Children, little children, old men. And there's no respect for anybody. They assassinated many rabbis. They get arrested simply because we are standing on the streets and saying clearly, this is an interlopers. These are people. It's a group, a political group that came into the Holy Land, into the fabric, a beautiful fabric that was existing for hundreds of years. The Muslims, and the Arab populace entirely, and the Jewish people amongst them as a minority, but we were living in total harmony. And a movement came. They simply put on a facade of the Jewish people and they say they represent, and it was accepted around the world. So this whole issue is what's created. What
do you think's going on in the mind of that IDF soldier as he beats an Orthodox Jew? What's in his head?
This would happen, yeah. And what would happen if this would happen in any other land? It would never be acceptable.
Well, that's a very interesting question. What is going through that young Jew's mind as he's assaulting this old Jew?
They are being influenced from the day they're born. They have a whole new schooling system, so they are taught that Judaism is a totally different thing. It's nationalism. They are totally uprooted from and they're taught that anybody who opposes them is a threat. That they equate Zionism, they equate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism with Nazism, and they want to say that anybody who's standing there is God forbid, they're going to be destroyed and thrown into the sea. They come along and their whole, it's a brainwashing from day one, that it's a panicking, it's fear-mongering. And that's what they teach them, that the other people that are here, they're a small little country amongst 70 other countries that surround it. And if they're not going to protect themselves with walls and with the Uzis and with everything, that they're going to be murdered like the Nazis murdered their parents and grandparents, and that it's because they hate the Jews. And these Jews, like me, are simply crazy crazies, fringe, and so forth. Even though
self-hating Jews.
Even though we were living
the
there,
Gentiles, they call them anti-Semites.
We are the communities. We were the communities were there, and our rabbis pleaded at the beginning with the United Nations. We have the Dushinsky at the time of the beginning. I said we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. It's in the records of the United Nations. These communities were the Jewish inhabitants of the land.
But Israelis thrive on this fear. I mean, the whole Israeli state has to play the victim card to keep its power. That's why it gets $4 billion a year from the US. So they can only do that by
it's about hammering the idea that if it weren't for Israel, you'd be eradicated, you'd be massacred.
And that's totally flies in the face of what Judaism, we believe that there's a God that protects us. Again, they're using the whole concept of physical prowess and strength to describe and to create what Judaism is. That is totally incongruous. That is contradictory to we teach a person, our children, what your belief is in God. God gives life. God protects us. So they're uprooting every concept of Judaism from this Jewish state, from this new Jew that's created. They're destroying not only the bodies, and they're exacerbating anti-Semitism simply because logically anybody can look at the facts now. We as Jews live together with Muslims as friends, as brothers and sisters for so many hundreds of years, and all of a sudden there's, as Dr. Tamimi so eloquently said, there was a mistrust developed in that, and we have to now patch things up and Zionism is exacerbating this. They're causing bloodshed, not only the Palestinians, of Jews. They're causing, this is this physical part. Spiritually, they've uprooted everything that it means, that our 3,000 years of our covenant to serve God, just as God is just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. Just as we are to live as to be a priests, a nation of serving God, and therefore that the world should learn from a person how to be a godly person. They've uprooted all of this.
I'm reminded. I was with Professor Avi Shleim from Oxford University last year, a few months ago, and I was actually quite moved by his story because he's an Iraqi.
Yes, he told me actually his story in an interview I did with him.
And one of the things that really moved me was the fact that his father never ever, upon migrating from Iraq, he sort of said he was compelled to migrate to the new Israel. He said he never ever found his footing. Until the day he died, he was always feeling that he was an outsider. And he said that his mother and his aunts, whenever remembering Iraq, they would actually weep from the nostalgia of their neighbors and their friends and the food they ate.
I think this was a common feeling among the first generation of Arab Jews, if I may call them, Arab Jews who were forced to migrate to Palestine. Yet the Zionists then had a program to bring up and educate the second generation in an extreme Zionist sort of mindset. And there is a major distinction between the first generation and the latter generations.
And this is what I'm reminded by the education system, how they educate Jews from childhood. But
I met somebody who was speaking about an Iraqi Jew. Somebody, I think his name is Galadi. His first name is saying maybe is Noam Galadi. He wrote a book called Ben Gurion Scandals, where he spoke about his history.
Naim Galadi.
And he wrote a book, and we personally met with him in New York when after he wrote this book. I questioned him. He wrote how they put bombs. The Zionists were caught. He was part of this Zionist group that they put bombs in synagogues to create
and accuse the Arabs.
A panic that the Jews should run away. And they did it in Yemen. Also, we've met with people who attest to this. And so they ran away because the Zionists tried to create an atmosphere that the Jews should feel uncomfortable, and therefore they should, and they'll run to Palestine, and then they'll build Palestine. When you say because they were forced to leave, they were forced to leave because of Zionist agitation. suspicion, creating of
it's quite interesting because relaying this story on public radio cost Ken Livingstone his career.
Yeah. But
it was relaying this story, just merely saying that someone wrote a book and mentioned what you've just said.
But these are the facts.
That cancelled him entirely.
These are the facts. The Jews lived for hundreds of years. I asked him, how was your life prior to your joining the Zion? How was the Jewish life there? So he said, how he regrets because he was disenchanted from Zionism. That's why he gave this. So he said, my father begged me, he said, not to join the Zion. He said, we lived, the rabbis would go on the street, the little Arab children would come and kiss the corners of the clothing. They would make sukkahs, that we make a holiday building, and we would hang fruits over there. The Arabs would come and the non-Jews would come and hang their fruits there that it should be blessed. We lived in harmony because, again, this issue is totally nothing to do with a religious conflict. This is only a portrayal of Zionism in order to glean support from the world and to intimidate people who should not speak up against what Israel is doing. And here it's becoming cemented and officially explained that opposing what Israel is doing, any action is defined as anti-Semitic. That is unacceptable, and it's not respecting the Jewish people and their religion. We gave our lives for our religion. Now our religion is being sullied, is being besmirched and dragged in the mud, and any action that is being done is being blamed on my religion and on the people. We gave our lives. We gave our lives also not to rebel against God and to recreate what Judaism is. Zionism has created a shell, a new type of a Judaism, and you are forced to recognize this as my Judaism. We have it here in the Stamford Hills and in the other places, pockets of very religious Jews, or you come to the United States, the most distinguished rabbis, scholars, and our communities, large communities, are clear in differentiating between what Judaism is and Zionism is. So although you're saying the world looks at it, well, the world sometimes buys into a mistake. It has happened before in history. The world as a non-Jewish world buys into evangelistic Christians, buys into the concept of the children of Israel for the land of Israel. Yeah. But God warned us as children of Israel, if we will try to recreate the state, then we will be punished by God, God forbid. So what they're supporting something that is damaging because of God warned us. Pete, and what's happened to the Palestinian people.
Just before you come in, one of the things, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, in Britain now, we're witnessing a rise of the far right, neo-Nazis, racist, nationalists, and all of these. And we often see demonstrations of Britain First and their ilk across the country, targeting Muslims particularly. But one thing that often catches my attention is that invariably, in every single one of those demonstrations and marches, you will find the flag of the State of Israel in every single one. And I have countless images of the likes of Tommy Robinson and Nick Griffin and the such being in the background. There's a flag of Israel. Now, I never understood this because these people are essentially the descendants of the Nazis. So how could anyone claiming to have any kind of affinity to this modern State of Israel?
Well, you mentioned Ken Livingstone earlier, and I mean, he got into trouble for mentioning the Havara Agreement. The Zionists were quite comfortable. I mean, Hitler in Mein Kampf, he admired the Zionists. He wanted the Jews out of Germany. He wanted them into Palestine. So,
they had a common objective.
Yeah, and they made money. I mean, in 1934, the Second World War, American Jews all over, we got to stop Hitler. They wanted a worldwide boycott of Germany, but they couldn't do it because the Zionists refused. They said, we're making too much money. Because every time a German Jew got their home taken away from them, the money would end up in the Zionists' pocket. And the deal was that they would buy German produce. It was like 22 million Deutschmarks. I mean, it all fell apart about 1939 when the war started. But even throughout the war, the Zionists were favored by the Nazis, and they had the Judenrat, and they were often in charge of these Judenrats, and they were rounding up Jews.
But also,
I mean, there was terrible things happening.
At the ideological level, Zionism is very similar to Nazism
Same
and fascism.
Aryan,
Same sort of
purity.
mentality. It's a mentality of someone who claims to be superior to others.
I mean, it's interesting, when Zionism first emerged, 1850s, was on the back of these nationalist movements. Italy was pulling together its principalities, becoming a new nation. Germany, the same thing. And the Zionists saw these new nations being formed, and they thought, well, we can do that. We can have our own. So the idea of the sort of nationalism came from looking at nation states forming, but their perception, as the rabbis pointed out, they weren't interested in Judaism as a religion. They were only interested in taking a land. And Herzl said anti-Semitism is our friend. He wanted more and more anti-Semitism so that they could get their own country. And throughout the Second World War, they knew about the gas chambers. They knew that people were being gassed, but they wouldn't get involved because it's only through the death of Jews in Europe that we will get our land after the war. And they knew this.
I think they used aspects of Judaism to justify themselves, like claiming that there was a divine promise given to the Jews.
Well, this was an evangelical Christian view
that
as well.
entitled them to come to Palestine, occupy it, and dispossess its population. There's a brilliant book by John Rose called The Myths of Zionism, where he explains that despite the fact that the founding fathers of Zionism were all atheists, secular nationalist atheists, they actually used the Bible to justify their project.
I think really on that point, there's two just very Theodor Herzl, as the father of Zionism, wrote in his own diary, and we have a book called Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism. Many of their quotes, many of the documents of them. So Theodor Herzl, and I'm quoting from his diary, page 14, he said, the way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism is to speak to the head priest of Vienna, to get an appointment with the Pope, to make a mass conversion of all the Jews of Austria to Catholicism. That's what he wrote. It should be done on a Sunday in the middle of the day with music and pride publicly. We are the last generation that held on to the faith of our forefathers. The conversion would be in St. Stephen's Cathedral. In other words, this will, again, nothing with my religion that they're using and attacking those who want to claim, who have claim against Zionism, and they're calling them anti-Semitic and so forth. When his solution that we gave our lives for generations, died for as Jews, he said just with the last generation, it should be done with music and pride. There should be a mass conversion to Catholicism. And on the concept,
I think he himself almost baptized
his child. Right
before he converted to Zionism.
Right.
He was intending to convert to Christian.
But he was one of many of these leaders. And Ben Gurion. And now again, always when we talk about this, it's not that every single Zionist was like that, but we're talking about the whole movement as a general rule, at the leadership in the beginning of that. Then they fused in religion in order to give it this legitimacy. They made a rabbinate and a chief rabbi, so they're using the religion really as a stick. And the Holocaust they're using as a stick also. At the beginning, they colluded with the Nazis. We put out a whole book about this called "The Holocaust Victims Accused." It's really it is unbelievable the fact what they did, how they worked with the Nazis. But afterwards, when the writing was on the wall, Jews were being murdered by the Nazis in the 30s already, when there was the start of this. So the Zionists were very powerful movements because they started way before Holocaust. They used the Holocaust, but they were way before then. And when they had a meeting of the Zionists, and this is in many places quoted in the Jewish press, it's a Zionist paper, and a religious Zionist paper, they call themselves, and many others quote Theodor Herzl, Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Zionism, and he says, they had a meeting.
First president of Israel.
Of Israel. I'm sorry, the first president of Israel. And he was
the graduate
pivotal,
of Manchester.
And he was the one who was pivotal in creating the state. Britain gave him a reward for his help to Britain by World War I. And he said, Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. They were talking about should they help save the Jews that are starting to be murdered. He said, Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated, meaning doctors, lawyers, to enter the Palestine Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. The other Jews will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another little great ghetto. Because
well, if there is anything called anti-Semitism, that's it.
Prime anti-Semitic.
I have massive writings. The ones that started the Yitzchak Greenbaum. He was the chairperson of the Jewish Agency at the time, and he said, when they asked me, couldn't you give money out of the United Jewish Appeal (UJA) funds for the rescue of Jews in Europe? And I said no. I say again, no. One should resist this wave which pushes the Zionist activities to secondary importance. The quotes are beyond belief, and they get away with this.
The Bund movement
again,
and the whole movement against
let me just say
Israel.
That, how much bloodshed is caused, how much hate, how much animosity, rift in the world because of Zionism. Yet they accuse others of anti-Semitism when their hands are covered in blood. It's just unacceptable. And I really plead with the leaders in Britain and in the United States respectfully, because as a Jew, we ask to pray for the well-being, and we are thankful for the home that is given to us, both in Britain and in America and throughout the world, the Western civilization that's giving us home. But why do they buy into this narrative and accept these people just because they're powerful? You are buying into their narrative and causing that there should be Palestinian bloodshed and Jewish bloodshed, and that our home is uprooted from us, from Palestine, this Jewish community that was there, and around the world we are suffering. And this is Jews uprooted from all the Middle Eastern countries because of Zionists. And yet they go in their merry way, the Zionists, and if anybody dares to at least try to bring to the table this logic and facts that we have, the facts of Judaism that are there, it's like our rabbi said, 1 and 1 is 2. The facts are there. You can't dispute the facts, and you can't dispute the fact that the very religious communities oppose what's happening. Yet you are labeled anti-Semitic, you are labeled unacceptable. This is unacceptable, and God should help change this.
How useful do you find recent reports of human rights organizations within the State of Israel, including B'Tselem and others, describing the state as being an apartheid state? How useful do you think that is to the narrative?
Well, I think it's useful, although it comes quite late. Yet it just asserts a fact, a reality. That's the reality, and we cannot deny that there is an increasing number of people within the Zionist state who are waking up to the nightmare. They're recognizing now that this Zionist entity is a nightmare. It's not the safe haven that was promised. It's not the democracy that was promised. It's racist, it's fascist, and I think it's brave of them to come out and say it.
Pete, I mean, you still have a few days to go. You have about 10 days or so to go for the tour. I'd be interested in knowing what are the main feedbacks, comments. Do you find that many of those who attend the meetings of this tour, that they're surprised that something new is revealed to them, that they're shocked into, asking serious questions of Israel and Zionism and the such?
So I've got a full-time job, but I spend many months, all my time off, visiting cities and flyering. I've put out 25,000 flyers for this tour. And I go to Muslim shops, cafes, restaurants, and 50% of the time, they look and they say, there's a Jew, he supports Israel. I said, no, he doesn't. Pro Palestine. Well, look, he's got a keffiyeh. A Jew that supports Palestine? And people are astonished. They just can't get their heads around it. And they're excited. This is interesting. And the response, we were in Bradford a couple of days ago. Everyone's queuing up, coming out of the shops, want to get their picture taken with the rabbi. They've never seen anything like it. Their minds are blown. There are probably a lot of Orthodox Jews that reject Israel, but the Neturei Karta are the brave ones, the ones that go out with the keffiyeh, the one that make the speeches. And people are, I saw him once on TV. and an amazing. It's incredible to see people's, and particularly Muslims, because they know a lot about the Torah, and they know that the Torah says there can be no mass return of Jews to Palestine without the Messiah. And they know this truism, so they know the message that the rabbi has, that they shouldn't be there, that this is an illegal state. But they've never seen anyone with the guts to stand up and say it. And this is quite terrible, amazing. But also at the same time, we have this problem with Zionists trying to cancel venues.
Of course.
I'm just always bewildered. I'm bewildered because, I mean, because we say it's the works of the Shaitan. We were in Gaza also, thank God. We went through Egypt, and we see. I went to visit the Samuni family in Zaytun. Yes, that
family that was wiped out.
This is a year afterwards. There's people around the world are good. There's human rights activists. The Palestinians suffering so long, so much, and they're in the eye of the world in a certain manner. It's not like it's in some back wilderness, and yet the people just do not seem to want to actively help the Palestinians. They want to maybe, but they can't bring themselves to because of the fear, most probably, of being labeled anti-Semitic, and they'll destroy. We're talking about usually well-to-do people who are very big businesses and things like that, and most probably they're just afraid that they'll just be ruined. And there's this people. I went there a year after the attack was on this family, and there were still people living in squalor, in tents, cold in the winter. The water is impure, the food is impure, and the totally destroyed. We went to visit the orphanages. This was just an example. And we went and cried with the people in the orphanages. And the rabbis from our community spoke about Der Yassin, Rabbi Beck of Blessed. Many of the people from the Jewish cringed when they spoke about what a good community. Yet they're being labeled and still accepted in the world that these are terrorists, while they're people, innocent people, who were attacked, and as a whole wide not only community, a people. And the world just is silent. It's unacceptable. That's just part of this Nakba, this narrative. As Jews, we are humiliated. We are frustrated. We are here on this tour to speak the mind, not only of me or my colleagues in New York, there's large communities in New York, or even here in Stamford Hills, in the heart of Jerusalem, hundreds of thousands of Jews that the world doesn't even want to recognize as the voice of Judaism. They are there and hurting with the Palestinians. We beg, we plead with the world at large, human rights activists, please stand up. It's not anti-Semitic. It's on the contrary. It's anti-Semitic to be silent because it causes that the Jews, in the long run, will be looked as inhumane, will be doing actions that's inhumane, not even knowing what they're doing, the certain people. I'm not condoning what they're saying. So the silence is creating anti-Semitism. We must speak up and stop a simply flawed political endeavor that's quite new. It's 70 years, 75 years now, and 150 years. When Judaism is 3,000 years, and our coexistence is thousands of years.
Pete, you brought it up, so I'm going to push you on it. You said that you've put out tens of thousands of leaflets, you're renting venues up and down the country, you're taking time off work, you're using your vacation time in order to do this. Where do you get the money from? Who backs you?
Edinburgh Council.
Edinburgh
Council, yeah. I don't know if you can see this metal plate of stitches on my wrist from here to here.
Okay, what's the story behind that?
Well, I mean, 10 years ago, Edinburgh tram system, I broke my wrist on a motor scooter on the tram rails, and it was the council's fault because they were badly laid, and I got compensation. So it's funny, I put on my Facebook page that thanks to the Edinburgh Council, the Muslim and Jew tour is going ahead, and all the Glasgow Zionists called up the council, what are you doing funding that Muslim and Jew tour? And the council called me and said, why are we funding this? And I said, well, you broke my wrist. So that was £10,000.
Listen, I have to say that I don't know of anyone. I literally do not know of anyone who would do that.
Well,
money that they got as compensation for an injury they incurred to put it to this kind of cause, I have to salute you. I mean, because
I've got a job, I've paid for my house, kids are grown up. I mean, I think I have never been so passionate. I mean, for 40 years, I've been passionate for Palestine. And I can't think of a better use of money. I mean, there's been a big challenge. The past 10 years, getting media coverage, this has been very difficult. You know, about 10 years ago, the big tent for Israel, the event in Manchester, the Zionists agreeing that they had to push the IHRA definition. They had to get into the BBC. They had to get into the political parties. They had to get into the trade unions. And then at the crucial point, when Corbyn appeared, they pulled out the IHRA definition and they'd forced executive committees to adopt it without ever going to any memberships. And in the past 5 years, the Zionists have won the PR war for Israel. You know, people are terrified now. I mean, we're doing this tour at the most difficult time. You know, Corbyn has now been more or less expelled from the Labour Party for being an anti-Semite. He's about as anti-Semitic as a Labrador puppy. You know, the guy's always
he was
been
amongst the very first to actually campaign for the rights of Jews and Jewish immigrants back in the 70s and 80s when no one was talking about their rights.
So people have seen this madness. And I used to work at the BBC. I know journalists, and they say, you know, we just can't get this stuff out. They're terrified. You know, if they do anything, the phone rings off the hook. The Israeli embassy is so organized, they can get 1,000 Zionists calling one number, you know, at the press of a button. And that journalist, at that point, their career is finished because they get thousands of complaints. So journalists live in terror and they won't publish. And even, you know, when I did a big event gig for Gaza, the journalists interviewed the bands, they had a big feature, couldn't get the newspapers to publish it. At the moment, you've got Palestine Action attacking Elbit factories all over the country, protesting. These are Israeli arms factories that obviously Britain supports. And the only time they get coverage is when it goes to court, when it becomes judicial proceedings. So it's very, very hard at the moment to get the media. But the Muslim media, Muslim radio, Muslim TV, they're good. They don't have the same fear. And that is brilliant.
Though some Muslims cancelled venues.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the first Muslim mayor of London, he cancelled a venue 3 days ago. And I was so disgusted, I wrote an open letter, sent it to 200 journalists, none of which have published it. But they know me. And I've been campaigning for many, many things for the last 4 years. So they know me
thank you.
And they know about this issue. And
thank
they
you
know
very, very much. That was an excellent, fantastic discussion. Thank you.